Hello, sports fans. This is Rob, the baseball time traveler. Thanks very much for joining me today. We're going to go back to 1968, the famous year of the pitcher. But before we get to 1968, we got to end it on a good note. In 1967, this is a photograph of the famous Ice Bowl played between the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. I watched this game, and it was a fascinating game to watch. Freezing temperatures and what those players had to endure. 1968 was a very dynamic year, to put it mildly, in the history of the world and of the United States especially. So many things happened. And I'm going to do a quick historical review as I usually do in these videos. So hang with me. We're going to get to plenty of baseball cards. 2 weeks after that famous Ice Bowl, Green Bay Packers worked their way down to Miami and went from several degrees sub-zero to several degrees above zero and prevailed over the Oakland Raiders 33-14. There's Jerry Kramer holding Vince Lombardi and Forrest Gregg, another Hall of Famer, lifting him up on the far left side there. Classic photo of the Green Bay Packers, and that was the last year of Vince Lombardi's era. On the world scene, the United States was embroiled in Vietnam, and in late January, the North Viet Cong started what they called the Tet Offensive, and this proved to be a very important offensive and battle in the Vietnam War, which really led to the dislike of the American public of what was going on in Vietnam. And President Lyndon Johnson, in March of 1968, kind of surprised the nation by announcing that he was going to withdraw from the race. And that led to other people coming in, anti-war candidates like Gene McCarthy and so forth. Two of the most sad events of 1968, I remember these specifically. You know how you remember where you were when certain things happened, and when Martin Luther King was assassinated in April, I remember exactly where I was. I was just outside my house. I was on my bicycle, and my mom had told me through the kitchen door that Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and it was quite a shock. And then only a couple of months later, in early June 4th to be exact, Robert F. Kennedy was shot, and I was made aware of this one. I lived in Pasadena and was just a few miles from the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, and my dad's cousin called and alerted that had happened, and I remember staying up late at night. I was so sad because I was really only 13, or approaching my 13th birthday, but Robert Kennedy was shot. Additionally, in October, the Mexico City Olympics took place, and I remember Bob Beamon breaking the world long jump record at 29 feet 2 1/4. And why this stuck out, I was at a high school football game in the Rose Bowl. In those days, back in Pasadena, the local high school teams were offered the opportunity to play in the Rose Bowl. And I remember watching the scoreboard, and they announced the 29 feet 2 1/4 inches. And I go, that has to be a typographical error, because the world record at the time was still in the 27, I think it was 27 feet 3. And it ended up that he broke the record by 22 inches. And that picture was a classic because they estimated he got 7 feet off the ground during the course of his travels over that 29 feet distance. Then, of course, on the right-hand side there, that's Tommy Smith, won the 200 meters. John Carlos is in the lower right-hand side, and there's an Australian runner. This was the Black Power protest of the Olympics, and this was a very turbulent time as far as race relations. The famous Heidi game. Watch this game as well. The Oakland Raiders and New York Jets were battling it out, and back in those days, TV switched off to regular scheduled programming, which was the movie Heidi. And the Oakland Raiders made a tremendous surprise comeback in the last couple of minutes, scored 2 touchdowns, and beat the New York Jets, and ultimately made it to the Super Bowl II. Now we'll move to the year of the pitcher, 1968. This was a fascinating year if you just take a look at the statistics, and I put together as much as I could here without overcooking it. But 339 shutouts were recorded in 1,619 regular season games. That is a fantastic percentage of shutouts. Average ERA was 2.98. 5 no-hitters were thrown in the American League alone. 2 no-hitters were back-to-back, and Jim Catfish Hunter threw a perfect game. On June 4th, Don Drysdale completed his 6th consecutive shutout in Los Angeles, and just a few hours later, Robert F. Kennedy was shot in the Ambassador Hotel, and Drysdale recalled driving home that night after the game and hearing that, and the entire nation was shocked by that. Kennedy ended up dying 2 days later on June 6th, and Drysdale got back on the mound on June 9th, and in the first couple of innings ended up breaking the record for consecutive innings, scoreless innings, and that record was held by none other than the big train, Walter Johnson. The streak finally came to an end in the 5th inning on a sacrifice fly, and Don completed 58 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings. He was quite the popular sports figure at that point. And here's a quick review of what he accomplished in that 6-week period or so. 6 consecutive shutouts, which is a record still standing. 58 2/3 consecutive scoreless innings. He threw his 200th win on my 13th birthday. He won the National League Player of the Month for June. He started the All-Star game in Houston, and the record that he set in 1968 was ultimately broken by Orel Hershiser. And here's Don's card. And I happened to be in attendance at that game where Orel Hershiser broke the record. It was in San Diego, and he had to go into the 10th inning to break that record. I think it's ironic that Orel is shown in a batting pose here. But that was quite a feat for Don Drysdale. Ended up obviously making it into the Hall of Fame. Next, we moved to Bob Gibson, who was another superstar pitcher during that 1968 period. Threw 5 consecutive shutouts during the month of June, so he was chasing Drysdale's record while Drysdale was underway in his. Bob won 15 games in a row from June 2nd to August 19th. He threw 28 complete games and had 13 shutouts. Another statistic, Bob Gibson won 255 career games and had 251 complete games. He led the National League that year with strikeouts, 268. Sandy Koufax had retired a few years earlier, so Bob essentially assumed the role of a strikeout king. I flashed this one because this is the record that probably will never be beaten. He compiled a 1.12 ERA during the 1968 season. He went on to strike out 17 Detroit Tigers in the Game 1 of the 1968 series. I remember actually having to come home from school because they were playing Central Time, and I was on the West Coast, and I was able to catch the final couple of innings on TV when I get back from school. And I remember when he broke that record, it was quite a fascinating time to see. And here's Bob's card. Mickey Lolich actually was the star of the 1968 series as the Detroit Tigers prevailed in a 4-3 over the St. Louis Cardinals. He threw 3 complete games, and that record has not been broken since. And I showed you the wrong card. Got ahead of myself, sorry. There's Mickey Lolich. We'll take a look at Al a little bit later. And Denny McClain, 31 regular season game victories. He went 31-6 in 1968 and was the only player since Dizzy Dean in 1934 with the Gas House Gang. And nobody has had 31 victories or broken the 30 barrier since. And here's Denny's card. And he was quite the hero during the 1968 season as he compiled so many victories at such a rapid pace. Everybody was anxious to see whether he was going to break that 30, and he did. Louis Tiant, meanwhile, in the American League, while Gibson was dominating with ERA, look at the number that Louis put up, 1.60. The opponents were only able to compile a 168 batting average against him during the entire 68 season. Now we'll take a look at some leader cards real quick. Here's the 1968 pitching leaders. Strikeout leaders: Sam McDowell, Denny McClain, and Louis Tiant. And our ERA leaders, as I just mentioned, Louis 1.60, and then Sam McDowell and Dave McNally. Quite an array of pitchers in 1968. Here's a closer look at Louis, who many argue should be in the Hall of Fame eventually. And Sam McDowell, I remember specifically when I was a kid, because this guy was on a trajectory to make it to the Hall of Fame, but injuries curtailed his career. He was a fireballer. And the rumor is that he was actually the inspiration for the famous Sam Malone character in the TV series Cheers. And then a couple other pitchers who were on those leader cards. Mel Stottlemyre, who as a rookie won a World Series game in 1964 and was a 20-game winner in 1965. And here's Dave McNally, who was a very solid pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles for many years. And he was part of that 1971 group of Orioles pitchers. 4 of them won 20 games or more. And that would have been Jim Palmer, Mike Cuellar, Pat Dobson, and Dave McNally. Now we'll go to the 1968 National League group. And here's the strikeout leaders: Gibson, Fergie Jenkins, and Bill Singer. Here's the ERA leaders: Bob Gibson, Bobby Bolin, and Bob Veal. And last but not least, the pitching leaders: Marshall, Gibson, Jenkins, 3 Hall of Famers. Take a close look at some of these records that were compiled. Juan Marshall won 26 games, and he was not even considered for the MVP voting. Bob Gibson went 22-9, and you kind of go, why did he compile only 22 wins and have 9 losses when he threw 1.12 ERA? Well, the St. Louis Cardinals batters that year, just like everybody else in both leagues, were struggling to produce runs. And Gibson was just so dominating, but his record didn't necessarily reflect it. And you look at some of the closer names there, a lot of Hall of Famers on those pages. And let's take a closer look at some of the cards. Here's Juan Marshall, 26-game winner. Bobby Bolin on the same pitching staff. Along with Gaylord Perry, the Giants had quite a pitching staff during that era, as well as many Hall of Famers, but they never seemed to be able to take on the Cardinals or the Dodgers effectively. And here's Fergie Jenkins. And we have Bob Veal and Bill Singer. All right, let's just take a look at some of the interesting factoids here. Major League Baseball, 1968, hitters really struggled. Carl Yastrzemski had the lowest batting average of any league champion ever. He batted .301. The collective slugging average of the American League, .339, remains the lowest since 1915. And the collective batting average of Major League Baseball was only .230. Here's a closer look. If you look at the right card there, Yastrzemski leads with a .301. And you've got Tony Oliva, former batting champion and ultimately a Hall of Famer, at .289. You go a little further down, Rod Carew hit only .273. If you look on the right-hand side, Mickey Mantle, .237 for that year. And we'll take a look at some hitter cards. We've got to be fair. We've shown all pitchers, so let's take a look at some hitter cards. Here's the 1967 Triple Crown champion and the 1968 batting champion at 301. And here's Al Kaline. I promised I'd show him a little bit later. Hall of Famer. And got to throw in these guys. Harmon Killebrew, 573 home runs, I believe. Willie, 660. Mickey, 535, if I recall correctly. And we'll finish off some of the hitters here. We've got Orlando Cepeda, Hall of Famer. Willie McCovey. Roger Maris. The Say Hey Kid. And we'll finish it off, Mickey Mantle. Two stars of 1968, Denny McClain, Bob Gibson. They were all over the baseball publications for 1969 going into that new season. And on the far right there, that's a Sports Illustrated celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Summer of the Pitcher. And I just thought this was kind of a fun slide to put up. 1968 MVP and Cy Young Award winners. They appeared later after the World Series on the Ed Sullivan Show. After this 68 season, a lot of changes were made by Major League Baseball, due primarily to the fact that Gibson threw a 1.12 ERA. 7 starters had an ERA under 2. Carl Yastrzemski won the batting title with a 301, and the entire teams in Major League Baseball struggled. 7 teams hit 230 or lower, and the Yankees, of all, not a murderer's row that year, they hit just a 214. So December 68, Major League Baseball rules panel changed it. They lowered the mound from 15 inches to 10. They shrunk the strike zone down. It had been the shoulders down to the kneecaps. Now it's armpits down to the top of the knees. And they definitely were working on spitballs and other doctored baseballs. Greater vigilance there. And in the end, it did work out. The offense did jump from a 6.84 runs per game to 8.14. So it was a positive change. And that will wrap 1968, the year of the pitcher. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch. Hope you enjoyed that, and we'll see you next time.